Hey guys, so for those of you that may not have seen my most recent update, specifically regarding this sub-series of follow-up videos, I've decided that I'm going to start breaking up these follow-up installments into multiple videos, kind of like I just did with the most recent theory and analysis series. As of this video's release, it should say something along the lines of going back, hearing voices, one of two. Because as of right now, I'm planning on this being a two-part follow-up. But that said, if I receive more comments on the Hearing Voices video essay, or if somebody replies to these follow-ups with more feedback that I feel is worth addressing in the video format, I can at any point in the future decide to sit down and just record me addressing that feedback and then upload that, and I can just go and change the title of this video, for example, to one of three, and then make two of two, say two of three, etc. And I can really do that with any of the follow-ups that I've already done or that I do in the future. I kind of like that idea of just, whenever I feel like something's worth addressing in video form, being able to just go ahead and throw that up there and, add it into a playlist that kind of keeps track of these back and forth conversations. Now, originally, I planned on this follow-up to Hearing Voices. I planned on that being much more than two parts. I kind of imagined that I would more or less do a video for each of the comments I received. Some of the comments probably would have been grouped together just because they are very related, or what I have to say about them is so short. But yeah, ultimately, and again, if you watched that follow-up, the most recent, if you watched that update, that most recent update, then you kind of heard me come to the realization that I want to start the next series of theory and analysis videos on April 19th. And as I was kind of like telling you guys that, I realized that, okay, well, that only really gives me 2 weeks to release the follow-ups that I wanted to do before I'd have to pause them to start releasing the new series. So yeah, what I have since decided is that I'm just the feedback that I've gotten so far for Hearing Voices, I'm gonna address in 2 videos. This one and then another one that'll come out soon. And I'm gonna what I'm also gonna do is, this should be coming out on Wednesday. Wednesday the 5th. Then I'm going to release part 2, again, assuming everything goes to plan. I always have to add that. But the plan is to then release the next, like part 2 of this follow-up on Sunday. And then the following Wednesday, so a week from when this is released, which will be the 12th, I'm going to go ahead and release a follow-up to Getting Lost, a crash course. That was the next one that was due for a follow-up when I kind of dropped off. And I wanted to kind of go ahead and start making progress on catching up on those. So I figured I would do a follow-up on that also in 2 parts. So basically, you should be seeing this video. This should be released on Wednesday the 5th of April. Part 2 of this will be released on Sunday, April 9th. Then, again, according to the plan, the first follow-up, part 1 of 2, for a crash course will be released on Wednesday the 12th, so a week from when this is released. And then the second part of that 2-part follow-up will be released on Sunday, April 16th. And then 3 days after that will be Wednesday the 19th, and assuming that I'm able to make the progress that I'm intending to make at the rate that I'm intending to make it, that should be when you see the first part of the next theory and analysis series. But with all of that explained, let's go ahead and start addressing some of the comments that I received to Hearing Voices. I wanted to start with a comment that I actually received on Reddit from a user called Lauren Cube. I do want to give my usual disclaimer that I may not pronounce all or any of these names correctly, and I do apologize for that, but I will try my best. But Lauren Cube says, "The Whispers is one of the biggest retcons of the show, because they clearly were supposed to be the others or some sort of manifestation related directly to them. One of the writers, not Damon or Carlton, at the time, around seasons 1 and 2, confirmed it, but he did say that it could be changed later on, depending on how things would go in the future of the show. Then, much later, by seasons 4 or 5, if I remember correctly, there's that Ben flashback where he is kidnapping Russo's newborn, and he says a line to the effect of, 'And the next time you hear whispers in the jungle, you'll go the other way.' For some reason, they decided to back out of that by season 6, probably so it would fit better with the spiritual tone the ending was going for, I assume. So yeah, the reason that I wanted to start with that is because something that I always want to make clear, I've tried to express this in multiple videos in the past, and I will continue trying to express this for anyone that's new to the channel. I want to clarify that the aim of my videos, of my main series specifically, is to reach conclusions based exclusively on in-universe or in-story evidence. During the show's run and in the years since, many of the writers, showrunners, producers, etc. have said contradictory things that contradict what other writers have said, or things that have contradicted what they themselves have said in the past. I've also talked before about how a lot of people see that sort of thing as evidence that they were making it up as they went along, and I don't agree with that assessment, or I certainly think that that's a misleading assessment. The reality of making this type of TV show is that they were constantly having to shift what they had intended the story to be due to all kinds of things, countless things that were mostly outside of their control, including actor availability, budget constraints, and all kinds of other things. Sorry, I just now noticed that I was out of focus. I don't know for how long that was the case, but I am losing daylight here, so I'm probably not going to go back and re-record that. So yeah, I apologize if I'm very blurry for a significant portion of time, but it shouldn't happen again. As I was saying, it made sense that in the years that the show was airing, that the showrunners, writers, whoever, would say a certain thing earlier in the show's run, and then later on that would either turn out not to be the case, or they would say something else that contradicted it. That makes perfect sense, given the way that the show had to evolve and shift and change. One good example is that I know at one point in the first half of the series, the showrunners insisted that we would eventually see the backstory of Libby, even though she had died. And this, of course, never came to pass. And it is fairly well documented that a big reason that we never did see that on screen is because of the writer's strike that happened in season 4 of the show. As far as the contradictory statements that have been made since the show finished airing, I think a big factor in that is the amount of time that has passed and the fallibility of human memory. Damon Lindelof himself has mentioned that in at least one interview that I have seen. All of that said, I have no doubt whatsoever that the writers did go back and forth over the years on what they wanted the whispers to mean. I think there is a lot of evidence that tells us that, including an interview that Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse did back in 2020.
So the idea is that the Whispers was sometimes the monster, sometimes the actual ghosts of the island, and sometimes just like a horrific story problem that we were trying to weasel our way out of.
But the goal of my essay is to look at the completed story as it exists now and come up with an interpretation that I personally find the most sensible and satisfying. So to say that another way, I do not disagree with the notion that certain scenes in which the Whispers are depicted earlier on in the series were intended to be the others at the time that they were written and at the time that they were filmed. I also would not be at all surprised if at the time the scene in season 6 where Michael appears to Hurley, at the time that that was filmed and written, I have a feeling that that probably was meant by the writers at that time to be taken at face value. And yet, for all of the reasons that I go into in all 3 parts of this video essay, I do believe it is the interpretation that makes the most sense, regardless of whether or not that's what they intended at the time that they wrote it. I won't bother recapping all of the things that I said because, I think I did a pretty good job of laying all of those out in a structured way in the actual video essay. But I think that there are a lot of questions or plot holes, honestly, that are raised by taking the Michael scenes at face value. And so if we disregard authorial intent, and again, there's no way to actually know 100% for sure what the authorial intent was at the time. But regardless, if we set that aside and just look at the story, I think my interpretation, as I've explained it, it makes the most sense to me, and it is the most satisfying to me on a storytelling level.
The baby and I were together for only 1 week when I saw black smoke. A pillar of black smoke. That night, they came.
This next comment that I wanted to address is from Ben Ward. He actually raises multiple points that I want to go over, one of which I'm going to circle back to in part 2. But the first one is this. One thing I'm confused about regarding Rousseau. Did she actually see a column of black smoke when the others took Alex? I always had it in my head that she made that up in order to engineer distractions to make it easier to take Aaron. So regarding the Pillar of Smoke in 1988, we know that she didn't just make this up, at least not completely, because when Jin is time traveling in season 5, he does see a pillar of black smoke in the distance on the day that Danielle kills her husband, Robert. But according to the story she tells in the season 1 finale, this pillar of black smoke did not appear until a week after Alex was born. And as we can see, the day she killed Robert, she is still pregnant with Alex.
Je veux que rien ne nous arrive. À toi et à notre bébé.
So this means Rousseau is either misremembering the sequence of events, or, and this is the idea I kind of prefer, she is embellishing her story, kind of taking real details that she remembers and twisting them to make her story sound more dramatic, in the hopes of making the camp more fearful and distracted so that she can later abduct Aaron. But either way, either she's misremembering or she's misrepresenting what exactly happened. She did see a column of black smoke in 1988, just not when she says she saw it. The fact that it was present well before Alex was abducted indicates that that pillar of black smoke was also unrelated to the others abducting anyone. In fact, the thing that I didn't even think about until I was responding to Ben's comment is that we eventually, in Ben's flashback, which we see in season 5, we learn that there was no plan to abduct Alex. Ben was sent there to kill Danielle. He didn't know that she had a baby. It was him discovering that she had a child that caused him to spare Danielle's life, and he decided to take care of the child himself, seeing as Rousseau was unfit in his eyes, and also he could provide her a better quality of life. So yeah, as I was saying, I was really kicking myself for not pointing that out in the part of my video where I was making the point that the pillar of black smoke surely was unrelated to the abduction of Walt. Yeah, I was upset that I didn't make that point, because I think that makes the case even better than what I said. But I did go back and add in me mentioning that in the completed version of the video essay where I combined all three parts. So yeah, depending on which version of part 2 that you watched, be it the standalone version or the one that is inside the completed essay, you may or may not have already heard me make that point. Now, Ben was kind of suggesting the idea that Rousseau made up the pillar of black smoke in order to distract the camp. And I think if that had been the case, then more than likely that would suggest she was the one that lit the fire in 2004 to begin with, to just kind of legitimize what she was saying. But there is one big reason that I don't think Rousseau herself was behind that pillar of black smoke. And that is the fact that she takes Aaron to that beach in the hopes of exchanging him for Alex. And she seems truly devastated when it turns out that the others aren't there.
They were not here.
Danielle, you have to give us the baby.
I just wanted my Alex back. I thought if I gave them the baby.
So yeah, while I do think it makes sense for Rousseau to kind of embellish her story, to kind of associate the pillar of smoke with an impending attack from the others, I don't think it makes sense that she was the one to light it. Just like I don't think that it makes sense that the others would have done it. Because again, now that we've completely ruled out the possibility that the pillar of black smoke in '88 was related to an abduction or an attack by the others, there's no other example of that pillar of black smoke being associated with the others attacking or abducting anyone. And again, what would be the motive in them doing that? If it wasn't part of some ritual, which we know it wasn't because they never did it any other time, why would they do that in relation to them abducting Walt? So in my opinion, as I said in the video, I think the thing that makes the most sense is that the Man in Black is behind it. For all of the reasons that I went into in the video, but also it has long been my opinion that the fact that we see that pillar of black smoke in the season 1 finale, and we find out what the monster looks like in that same season 1 finale, that being a column of black smoke, I do not think that that is an accident. I think that we are meant to associate the two. And again, looking at the completed story and knowing what the monster's motivations are, I think that this link, at least this visual link between these two things, points us in one very obvious direction. The series epilogue seemingly suggests that reuniting Walt with the spirit of his father will help Michael to finally move on.
We need you. You have work to do. Starting with helping your father. My father's dead. Doesn't mean you can't help him.
Moving on to another point that Ben Ward brings up. So what are your thoughts on that line from Ben in the epilogue then? So when I uploaded part 3, I was really kind of hoping that somebody would ask this question, because as I was writing the script, and I wanted to bring up that epilogue and, many people's interpretation of, people reading that as Walt is going to come back to help his father move on so that his father can get closure, or, Walt can use his abilities to help him not be stuck on the island. I felt I needed to bring that up in the video, which I do, but I couldn't find a way without going on an entire tangent that would have to re-explain one of my other theory videos. I couldn't find a way to share my actual interpretation of that aspect of the epilogue. Because in order to do so, I would have to devote, probably half of that section of the essay to going over everything I talk about in the Getting Lost video, Two Birds, One Window. If you have not seen that video, I ask you to please check that out now before continuing on with this one, because I am going to go ahead and talk about what my conclusion in that video is. And I think that me just coming out with that might seem a bit more absurd than if you were to watch the video where I make the full case for it. So yeah, if you haven't seen that, please do go ahead and click right up here and then come back to this. But essentially, the conclusion of that video, in my genuine view on the question of Matthew Abaddon, is that he is Walt from the future. That at some point after the epilogue to the series, Walt is tasked with moving the island, and then when he comes out at the exit, which we know that the person that moves the island and comes out at that exit, they always arrive at that fixed spot in space, but it seems to be an unpredictable spot in time. So I propose that an older Walt moves the island at some point in the future and comes out at the exit at some point around the 90s, at which point he is quickly apprehended by Widmore's people, because we do know that Widmore had the exit under surveillance when Ben arrives in 2005 and when Locke arrives in 2007. So it makes sense that in this hypothetical scenario where an older Walt arrives in the mid-90s, because that's after Widmore has been banished, it makes sense that Widmore would quickly come into contact with him. And according to the interpretation that I kind of go over in Two Birds, One Window, I think that Walt, who is Matthew Abaddon at this point, tells Widmore that he is from the future, which, is true. But I think he tells Widmore that if the events play out the way that Abaddon knows they're going to play out, it will result in Widmore eventually reclaiming the island, which is kind of true. And I think that is how Widmore knows to do certain things. He knows that Flight 815 disappeared on the island, and that's why he stages the wreckage. He seems to know that Desmond will end up on the island if he goes on the sailing race, and he seems to know who to send to the island on his freighter, just to name some of the things that Widmore seems to know about. Anyways, so having that interpretation of what Walt's future is post the series epilogue, that kind of opens up another possibility for what Ben means when he talks about Walt helping his father even though he's dead. And instead of re-explaining that, I think I'm just going to go ahead and edit in what I said in the follow-up to Two Birds, One Window, where I kind of already explained my interpretation of what Ben says to Walt. So here's that. But what I will say now, as it does pertain to this video, is that I don't think that Walt was being brought back to the island to help his father move on. The exact exchange between Ben and Walt regarding Michael is this.
We need you. You have work to do. Starting with helping your father.
My father's dead.
Doesn't mean you can't help him.
We, the audience, have for a long time, and at least for the most part, have interpreted that to mean, because of what we saw in season 6, we've interpreted that to mean that Walt is going to somehow help his father move on. But there's nothing about Ben's phrasing that actually explicitly says this is the case. And because I subscribe to this theory about Matthew Abaddon, I do think there is another explanation for what Ben means, and that is this. If Hurley and Ben are sending Walt back in time to fulfill his role as Matthew Abaddon, whose role in the chain of events was vital to making sure the end results were what they were, then one of the things that Walt is going to end up accomplishing for them is assembling the freighter crew. We see that he had a role in this in the season 2 episode Confirmed Dead.
Every member of this team was selected for a specific purpose.
But what I think is an interesting implication about this is that he very well may have had a role in approving the application of Kevin Johnson, aka his father Michael. And in doing so, he would have played a vital role in giving Michael that opportunity to redeem himself. So when Ben shows up, and he even says this line that I love,
I can't change the past. I can only take responsibility for it.
I think he is offering Walt the opportunity to help his father by giving him that chance to redeem himself. So when Walt says, my father's dead, that is true. That is objectively true. He's been dead for years, from where they're at in time. But in this world where time travel exists, just because Michael's dead doesn't mean that Walt can't still play an active role in helping him. The next comment that I wanted to get into is from a user called Elkey. Again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But they say, I've always loved Michael, and the idea of him being a whisperer never really sat right with me, especially when he'd already redeemed himself. So yeah, I ended up not going too deep into why I also feel that Michael redeemed himself before he died in season 4. Because as I said in part 3, I feel that that's a much more subjective argument. I think there's probably a lot of people that could say that he didn't redeem himself. And it's kind of hard to argue that with facts. Because yeah, there is a case to be made that he didn't. I also talked about this in my follow-up to Two Birds, One Window. But Michael, throughout most of season 4, wants to die. He tries to kill himself multiple times. And that is because of the guilt that he feels over what he did. So, in a sense, you could see him staying behind with the C4, knowing that it's going to go off. That's not as much of a sacrifice as it would be for most people. So yes, while he does save the lives of at least 10 people, I think it's fair to say that there is a selfish motivation at play as well. I just feel that by that point, he genuinely wants to help his friends, and he genuinely wants to make up for what he did.
And now you're working for Ben.
I do not work for Ben. I'm trying to make up for what I did. I'm trying to help you out here.
And as I have said previously, if he only wanted to die, he doesn't have to stop the bomb from going off. He could just do nothing and let it go off. But no, he makes the effort to keep it from exploding for as long as possible so that his friends can survive. But yeah, I didn't want to go into all of that in the actual video essay because I do think it's a weaker argument to make, or it's easier to kind of argue against than the points that I did make, which is comparing Michael's sin of of murdering these two women in this act of desperation to the sins of all these other characters that, as far as we can tell, don't suffer the same fate that Michael did of being stuck indefinitely on the island against his will, so it seems. A very similar sentiment to what Elkey just expressed was also communicated by user David Freeman. I do realize that that's a W and not a V, but I'm assuming it's supposed to be pronounced David. He also said, Michael had an amazing story in season 4, and the fact that he is back in 6 is just wrong in my opinion. And yeah, so other than what I've already just said, I agreed for a very, very long time, because it did feel to me when I first watched it that we were meant to take that scene at face value. I'm not entirely sure how much criticism I've expressed of the show on this channel. I know I have to some degree. But yeah, overall I think Lost has a reputation, Lost's ending specifically, has a reputation that is completely unearned and unfair and completely misrepresents the quality of the show and its ending. For that reason, I am very dedicated to defending it, and, you know, as best I can without spoiling the show and, you know, kind of trying to address things that are misconceptions. That said, me doing that, me feeling compelled to do that, I think for a long time meant that I felt like I couldn't be vocal about what criticisms I do have of the show, specifically in the last season. In my opinion, I do think that the writing is not as high quality as it was in earlier seasons in season 6. Generally speaking, I think there are some truly fantastic episodes and scenes, some of my favorites, that are in season 6. And I think the finale itself is the perfect conclusion to the story, you know, to the 119 episodes that already existed. I think there's no better way to take everything we already had in those first 119 episodes and conclude it than what they did with that finale. I think it is perfect. I really don't have a criticism of the finale, other than perhaps a couple of small things that were a result of what had already been happening in season 6. But overall, you know, compared to the other seasons, I do think that the writing is weaker. I actually feel like a lot of the dialogue in season 5 of Lost suddenly dips in quality. Anyways, I'm not trying to start bashing the show and its writing by any means. The point I am trying to make is that there are quite a few things throughout season 6 that I am critical of, that I do kind of wish had played out differently, or been depicted differently. And yeah, for over a decade, Michael's appearance in season 6 was one of those things, for all of the reasons that I have talked to death by now. But also, well, and I did already kind of talk about this in the videos, but yeah, like, if we take that at face value, there's no reason for him to show up and do what he does, other than the plot needs him to. Like, oh, we need the candidates to end up with the Man in Black so that the Man in Black can execute his plan and kill off some people, and, you know, that gets, you know, that sets up the finale. And it just seems to me, again, if we're taking it at face value, which I agree was probably how it was intended when written, there's no reason for that to have happened other than the story needs them to join up with the Man in Black. And yeah, I feel like that's lazy storytelling, and it raises all of these other problems. You know, it raises all these unnecessary questions of, why do the Whispers, or Michael specifically, why is he only interfering now? Why is he trying to protect people now, but not when Hurley asks to go see the Man in Black? And yeah, it just raises all these questions about the nature of the Whispers in general. Questions that I feel like prior to that scene didn't exist. You know, as I explained fairly in depth in part 2, I think we already had an answer, a perfectly satisfying answer for the Whispers. And yeah, just adding this scene in just complicates that unnecessarily.
What are you doing here? I'm here to stop you from getting everyone killed.
Now that transitions pretty nicely into the last couple of comments I wanted to address, including a couple from Eternity in Our Hearts, who says, I always thought by getting everyone killed, Michael meant they'd fall for the bomb trick on the plane. They'd have nowhere to go in the air and would all die, leading to the Man in Black eventually turning off the light and destroying the world. Michael knew that going to talk to the Man in Black was the only course of action that would lead to the Man in Black getting killed. Perhaps there was no possible scenario in which there are no casualties along the way. So let me start with the latter half of that comment. I do not think that that is a stretch on a logic level. The idea that there was no other way, or there was no way for things to unfold in which some people wouldn't get killed. And perhaps Michael, in his state of existence, foresaw that the path in which the least amount of people would die, or the path in which the Man in Black would be defeated, started with Hurley taking the group to the Man in Black and allowing things to proceed from there the way that we see them proceed. Again, on a logical level, I think that that is reasonable. But here is the issue that I personally have with this idea. Sorry, that was kind of a dramatic moment to have to stop what I was saying. But yeah, my memory got full, so I had to stop and delete a bunch of things, and then now it's too dark to continue without a light. I am going to start doing better about recording these earlier in the day so that I don't have to change the lighting. I prefer natural lighting. I can't really explain why. But anyways, what I was saying. The reason that I don't like that idea is that Michael's whole arc post season 2, which he's not in season 3, so essentially his whole arc in season 4, centers around the guilt that he is grappling with after the choice he made in season 2. That choice being to sacrifice innocent lives in order to save his son. Dealing with that guilt, and also the question of whether or not he can be redeemed, is Michael's whole arc in season 4, which culminates in his death. As we've already talked about, many viewers, myself included, felt that Michael did redeem himself when he died. However, his appearance in season 6, if taken at face value, seems to suggest we were wrong, that he did not succeed in redeeming himself, and that is why he is in this state of existence. So if the conclusion to Michael's arc in season 4 was that he did not redeem himself for the sin of sacrificing innocent lives to save someone else, then in my opinion, it would be a very narratively inconsistent arc for his role in season 6 to be nothing more than a facilitator of the sacrificing of innocent lives to save other lives. Now, I'm not trying to get into whether or not, that would be right or wrong. This idea of, okay, well, somebody's going to have to die in order to defeat the Man in Black. I'm not trying to say that him or anyone else making that decision would be wrong necessarily. There's a good philosophical debate to be had about that. But we don't need to get into that. My point is that it would be inconsistent for Michael's arc specifically. If the first time he made that decision, it caused him to spend the rest of his life with this terrible guilt, which made him want to die, And it was apparently so unforgivable that he gets trapped in this purgatorial state. And yet, in death, according to this idea, while he is suffering this punishment, whether it be self-inflicted subconsciously, consciously, or inflicted by some kind of higher power, while suffering this punishment for that sin, he makes the same decision again. And keep in mind that this is the last time that we see this character, assuming that this is that character, in the show. And thus, this would be his final act in the story. His final act would be to do this, to make the same mistake. In mistake, I'm using that based on his own reaction to it. The guilt that he felt, the punishment he's suffering, be it self-inflicted or otherwise. All of this tells us that at least in Michael's eyes, he feels he did something horrible. So the resolution to that story, to that character arc, which, you know, for him, I mean, it takes place over more than half of the series, is to just do the same thing again. So yeah, even though, again, I think on a logical level, that makes sense, what Eternity said. But it just doesn't work for me on an emotional, character, or storytelling level. Now, going back to the first part of what they said regarding the idea that if Michael hadn't came to Hurley, then the result may have been that the candidates would have ended up in the same situation with the C4, except on that plane in the air where there would have been no way to escape, the way many of them do on the submarine. My issue with that is that I don't really see how all of the candidates would have ended up on that plane, because, you know, in that scenario, Hurley's group would have proceeded to Hydra Island without having met up with the Man in Black's group, which contained Sawyer. Sawyer's the one that is definitely still a candidate. You know, Kate's name had been crossed off. And Saeed, I would argue, was not a candidate anymore after being infected. But regardless, there's at least one candidate in the Man in Black's group that he needs to be involved in that C4 situation. And I don't see how Hurley's group going straight to Hydra Island would have resulted in all of the candidates, including Sawyer, ending up on that plane. Also, I don't know how it would have resulted in Jack ending up on the plane, because he obviously did not want to leave the island. Furthermore, if Hurley's group's intent was purely to destroy the plane, I also don't see how the plane would have ended up airborne. So yeah, while I do think that the second part of their comment is reasonable, that there was no way in which the Man in Black could be defeated without some people dying, I think that part is fair. But as far as the specific situation of, you know, that happening, of them being on the plane with the C4, if Michael hadn't interfered, I don't think that that's likely, in my opinion. Now, before moving on to a couple more comments from Eternity in Our Hearts, I did want to address another comment kind of on the topic of Michael being genuine. Like, if we take that those scenes with Michael in season 6 at face value, there was another comment kind of related to that. This one's from Benjamin M., who says, "What Michael asks Hugo to do doesn't benefit only the Man in Black either, since the plane is what several of the Losties end up using to escape the island in the finale." So, yeah, I mean, Michael appears, and his initial, the initial thing that he discourages Hurley from doing is going along with the plan to blow up the plane. He basically insinuates that going over there to blow up the plane will result in a lot of people dying.
What matters is you're going to cross that island to blow up that plane. People are going to die. A lot of people, it's going to be your fault.
Now, this may not have been what Benjamin was saying, but I think it's worth noting that them not destroying the plane doesn't save anyone's life. At least as far as I can tell, it doesn't. Pretty much simultaneously to that plane taking off, Jack resolved the situation with the heart of the island, and we have no reason to think that Hurley, Ben, Desmond, Rose Bernard, etc. We've no reason to think that their lives were in any danger. It seems that Jack stopped what was happening. So yes, the plane was able to take off because Michael stopped them from destroying it. But given that Jack resolves the danger at the same time that the plane takes off, I don't think that you could say that he saved their lives. And I also don't think, and this may have actually been Benjamin's point, because he didn't say that this saved lives. He said that the Man in Black wasn't the only one to benefit. So yeah, he may not have been implying what I just said. He may have just been saying that, yeah, there was a benefit to Michael stopping them from blowing up the plane, and that is they were able to use the plane to leave the island. But my issue with that is there were other ways that they could have escaped the island. Had the plane not been functional by that point, they could have taken the sailboat. At that point, it's implied that with Hurley running the island now, that it wouldn't be as difficult to leave. So ultimately, I wouldn't say that I disagree entirely. I mean, I don't disagree with what is stated, that stopping the plane from blowing up, that Michael stopping the plane from being blown up, benefits other people besides the Man in Black. But I don't think the benefit is nearly comparable, in the big picture of things. And that doesn't really address, the bigger issues as I see it. What Michael specifically says is that he's there to stop Hurley from getting everyone killed, or to get a lot of people from getting killed. That's what he says he's there to do. And yet he points Hurley right in the direction of the Man in Black's camp when Hurley asks him. If his concern was saving people's lives and stopping Hurley from getting people killed, yeah, it just seems like maybe throwing a warning out there. Like, hey, that guy actually wants you dead. He can't do it himself. I don't know. Again, the whole idea that Michael is genuinely who we're seeing, and he is genuinely a ghost. Again, that raises so many questions as far as like, what all does he know? Like, if he knows that executing this plan is very likely to get a bunch of people killed, then he should also know that the Man in Black is plotting to get these candidates killed. And he doesn't really care who else is killed in that process. And so, yeah, it just does not sit right with me that Michael would warn against one thing, even if it was really dangerous, but not the other. But okay, before ending part one of this follow-up, I wanted to just go ahead and address the couple of other comments from Eternity in Our Hearts. They commented on part two, saying, I always thought the ghosts were trying to warn the two groups of the danger. Now, I'm not 100% sure which two groups they're referring to. There are many incidents in which the whispers appear that I go over in part two. They could be referring to the conflict between Jack's group and the others at the end of season 2. They could be referring to the mercenaries versus the others at the end of season 4. They could be referring to the Tailies and then Shannon and Saeed. I did kind of cover that in part 3. I briefly addressed that, where I don't think Shannon would have been in any danger if the others hadn't manifested to begin with. So I would not like the idea that the Whispers as ghosts were trying to warn about something that they are in the process of causing. But yeah, I mean, as far as any of the other scenarios where there are two groups of people, I I think I do a good job in that video in part 2, illustrating that the presence of the whispers, much like I just said in the Shannon scenario, doesn't tend to help. It tends to escalate tensions. Yeah, so I mean, let's take the season 4 ambush as the example, just because I do feel like I did kind of want to go into that a little bit more in the essay, but I felt like it was taking too long to focus on it. So when Kate runs out of the jungle and tells Kimi what she tells him, I think it's fair to say that that directly informs Kimi's response to the incoming threat of the others. You know, I'm not really a military person, and I'm probably not the best person to assess what is the most strategically sound way of handling these types of situations. But I feel like if Kimi had known when Kate runs out of the jungle that the others were actually, like, the real reason that the others were about to be present, which, you know, they actually were already present, but Kimi didn't know that based on the intel he had. I think if he knew the reason for their presence was specifically to neutralize them and free Ben, I don't think he would have sent his team one by one in different directions. I think, and again, I'm not an expert on this type of thing, but I think the more strategically sound option would have been, if he had known that, I think the more strategically sound option would have been to hunker down in the clearing and take out threats as they appear. By sending his men out there individually into the jungle where the others are hiding, which again, I'm asserting that he did not know. I don't know why I said I'm asserting that. I don't think anybody's arguing that he didn't know that at that point. Him sending his men out there individually into the jungle where the others are hiding enables them to take out members of that team one by one. And yes, the second one that they take out does end up, you know, raising the alarm by shooting his gun off. But they do get the first one without raising the alarm, and feasibly, had they been a little bit more efficient, you know, they could have taken out a couple more without raising the alarm. So looking at this from the other's perspective, you know, that this plan to send Kate in and say what she says, that is great strategy on the other's part. Because yeah, what now is in Kimi's head, and the reason that he reacts the way that he does, he thinks that the others are chasing Kate, and they have no idea that they are about to run into these seriously armed, well-trained mercenaries. So Kimi thinks that they have the advantage of, you know, the others not knowing what they're wandering into. So that makes a little bit more sense, you know, not knowing exactly which direction they're going to be coming from, but, you know, thinking that you know that they're going to be coming from just one direction and, you know, stumbling into this dangerous situation. You know, that makes a little more sense to kind of send them out in different directions. But my point in part 2 is, when I discussed that situation specifically, is that the whispers, like, immediately undermine that plan. I mean, they wait until they're fanned out, but you start hearing the whispers before that gun goes off, when the second one is taken out. And like I said, that undermines, if the whole plan of the others was to trick the mercenaries into thinking that the others were wandering blindly into this situation, then giving away the fact that they are actually surrounding them and are fully aware, all that accomplishes is Kimi suddenly being aware of the fact that they are surrounded and in danger, and not, they don't have the upper hand that he assumed they did. And so then when the gunfire goes off, he tells them to spread it, spread their gunfire. Whereas, so imagine that exact situation played out minus the whispers. All that would have raised the alarm is the gunfire from that one person. And so that, in Kimi's mind, in the mercenaries' mind that are still by the helicopter, all that gunfire would have suggested to them is that, okay, that guy, he's the one encountering the incoming people. And then they could have focused on that area. The gunfire itself does not, without the whispers, it would not have alerted them to the fact that they are surrounded. And Kimi's response would almost certainly not have been to just spread the gunfire. The fact that the whispers influenced this conflict in that way, again, in my opinion, them spreading that gunfire and then the others having to start shooting, the others having to start attacking in a less covert way, it puts a lot more people, it puts everybody else in that situation at more risk. So again, I don't know if that's the situation that Eternity was referring to, but I just wanted to use that as an example because I did kind of want to go into that more specifically in the video, but I felt like if I spent too long trying to explain all that it would make the video even longer than it needed to be. And yeah, I think that any of the examples of the whispers that I went into, I think they all fit that pattern as far as when there's two groups involved. The idea that these spirits are trying to warn anybody, they'd have to be pretty inept and pretty clueless to keep doing that when the pattern is clearly that they only escalate things. And the last comment, also from Eternity in Our Hearts, says, "The whispers to Rousseau were correct. They were coming for the child, just not the one she thought." So yeah, I responded to them saying that I don't know if the reason they commented that was because they thought I was trying to imply the opposite. That may not have been why they commented that. But just to be clear, at no point in my video do I say or insinuate that the whispers are lying about the idea that the whispers are going to come for a boy or come for a child. Certainly never intended to come across as though I was questioning the veracity of that. My point, the question I was raising is why was this communicated to Danielle at all, or communicated around Danielle at all? If it's the others, which I think most people agree at this point that it wasn't, but let's just assume, the way Rousseau did, that it was the others speaking. That doesn't make sense. Why would they be in the middle of the jungle whispering about them coming to abduct the boy? It also doesn't make sense. I had to say that in part 3 too. Like, the words she must have heard would surely have included the words "we," which again insinuates that it's either the others or somebody that wanted her to think it's the others speaking. Now, I did kind of think about it after I released the video, and I suppose there's a scenario in which she could have heard, it's this disjointed whispering. Maybe she just heard the words "coming for the boy," or and then "coming for the child." That's possible. I mean, it's convenient. I kind of talk about how, in my mind, the idea that the whispers are the ghosts that just pop up whenever the plot needs somebody to receive information. I find that to be a plot contrivance if we accept that interpretation. Because, yeah, the entirety of the events that happen in the season 1 finale come from Rousseau hearing what she heard. Now, arguably, the others still would have come for Walt, assuming the raft hadn't launched that day. They may have, I think they would have waited actually until the raft launched, just because that would have been the less risky way to get him. That would have involved the least amount of risk to them if they just wait until a much smaller group is out on the open ocean. I think that was probably always the others' plan. So yeah, while the others undoubtedly would have abducted Walt without Rousseau hearing what she heard, everything else she's the one that sets in motion. She's the one that tells them the others are coming. The pillar of black smoke gives credence to that, and as I've said, I don't think she's the one that lit that. But the pillar of black smoke would have meant nothing. I mean, it would have been ominous, but it wouldn't have triggered a reaction in the 815ers the way that it did if Russo hadn't come along saying what she had said. So again, assuming Russo didn't hear what she heard, from the point of view of the 815ers, what would have happened is they would have seen the pillar of black smoke. They would have no idea what that meant. They would have no idea if that's Russo herself setting up a signal fire for whatever reason, or somebody else that's stuck on the island doing that. Or yeah, maybe it is the others. Maybe it's these people that Ethan was with. But they would have no reason to see that pillar of black smoke way off in the distance and think that that means they're in danger. That somehow is an indication that they need to start handing out guns again. They need to go on this dangerous mission to get this unstable C4 and blow open this mysterious hatch that could have anything dangerous inside of it. Yeah, none of that would have happened if Russo hadn't heard what she heard and interpreted it the way she did and reacted to it the way that she did. So the idea that it was just ghosts gossiping about something that was going to happen, that the others were going to do, there's no motive in the story for that to have been communicated around her. It just, the story needed it to. You know, every story has some degree of contrivance to it. I'm just saying that we have a perfectly reasonable alternative that is much less of a plot contrivance. The idea that the Man in Black wanted Russo to hear this and react the way that she did, it makes so much sense. And in my opinion, it recontextualizes all of the events of that finale in a really cool way. Again, by the time you get to the twist at the end of season 5, where it's revealed that this is the antagonistic force that has had influence over so much of the story. And I think the main appeal of any good plot twist is the way in which it recontextualizes things. And I just think the degree to which this twist recontextualized things is underestimated, in my opinion. That was a bit more of a tangent than I meant to go on, but my point is, yeah, I never meant to question the idea that what the Whisper said was accurate. My point was, why? Why did Russo hear what she heard? Was it just because the plot needed her to in order for this exciting finale to happen? Or was a character with agency that was working behind the scenes this entire time? I say behind the scenes, but really, in a lot of cases, it was very overt to cause these events to happen. But okay, that is approximately half of the feedback that I have received so far to the Hearing Voices series. That may have been a little bit more than half. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to cover for now, for part 1, and then there's still quite a bit to address in part 2. So yeah, I kind of outlined my plan for releasing these at the beginning of the video. We'll see. I now have to start editing, and I did end up, as usual, talking much more than I had planned to, so we'll see how long it takes to edit this. But I still feel pretty confident that I can get this out on Wednesday the 5th. And then I can get out part 2 the following Sunday. I still feel pretty good about that. But yeah, so I'll keep you guys updated if anything changes. Yeah, but I hope you come back for the next one. Oh, you're still here. Hopefully that means you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider sticking around and being a constant for this channel by clicking right up here to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive. In the meantime, feel free to check out previous content from this channel by clicking here or here. Oh no. Please subscribe.